Welcome CSE 103 Intro to Computing to our lesson on working with databases, and we're going to be using the SQL language to write queries to retrieve information from a MySQL database. In the past, we used Pt1, which is a web-based database, and we had a free option to do that, and people just had problems connecting because it was wide open. It wasn't anything where you created an account. And there's other ways we can do this where we have to create an account. It might be a lot more complex. This will be the easiest thing. We're just going to use W3Schools. So if you just go search for W3Schools, and they have all kinds of tutorials for web development, programming, all kinds of things. If you just go to the main page for W3Schools, it has SQL tutorial. You can use that or MySQL, but I'm just going to go here and I'll use MySQL just because that's what we're talking about. And if you come to this main page and just go to tutorials, and under server side, there's MySQL and SQL. Now, it's not really going to make a big difference because we're going to be using the SQL language. MySQL is like a type of database. SQL is the language that interacts with the database. So you could use this. If you chose the other one, it wouldn't be a big deal. But anyway, what we could do first is just scroll down here, and they just have an example of select from customers, and just use try it yourself. This will open up in a new tab. And what this does, it works with this sample database in W3Schools. And this is the whole database over here, and these are all tables that are inside the database, and that's what a database is. It's a collection of tables, and remember, tables are just rows and columns. So these are just tables that have rows and columns. The columns are basically the field names along the top, and the rows are basically the records that are inside the database. So if it was customers, the names of the customers would be the rows or the records. So that's what we're going to look at right now. And the first thing you could do is just hit Run SQL. And it's just going to run this SQL code. And notice that you'll see keywords in SQL in blue. And usually we put them in capital letters. Although you don't have to, I recommend doing that because it'll just look better and you'll recognize things a little bit better. So what you're going to do is write your code up here, and you'll see the result down here. And you'll basically just see your table or parts of your table down here. So I'm going to hit Run SQL. And what this is doing, just to explain this select statement, and if you're wondering where this is coming from, if you go back to this page, it talks about the select statement. It talks about where, which is a filtering clause. There's and, or, and not, which works with the filter so that you could join things or exclude things. There's also limit. There's a count function that we could use. There's like, where you could find things that begin with a certain letter. There's all kinds of things you could find here, and it's really easy in terms of finding resources. It just depends on what you want to do. And what we're doing first is we're just looking at all the records in our customers table. And if you look over here, it already says 91, so we already know. So it's no big surprise that when we ran the query, it says 91 records in there. Now you could delete records, you could add records, but these are the records in here, and these are the field names across the top, or they're also just known as the columns. Sometimes you'll see them known as fields, but they're the columns. They're basically the categories of the records that are below them. So there's customer ID, and this is usually some kind of primary key, meaning it's an ID number or some kind of identification that cannot be repeated, can't be duplicated. You can have the same customer name, people can be at the same address, people could be from the same city, and all that kind of stuff. But usually this one, the first one, or the primary key, or in this case the customer ID, is the primary key, and it's the one that's not duplicated. And it starts at 1 and goes up from there. And notice that the column names are using kind of a camel case, although they're starting with capital letters and they're not using any spaces. You don't want to use spaces for these column names, but they are using capital letters in there. And when you identify these, you have to do it just like this. So you can copy and paste this stuff too when we do some code. But I usually try to do lowercase letters. I think that's easier, then you don't have to worry about this. But we'll follow what they're doing here in terms of this. Now, the first thing we did is just select all from customers. Now, what this asterisk means, it means all columns. That means it's going to show the customer ID, the name, the contact name, address, city, postal code, and country. It's showing all those. If you just wanted to see a couple of them, if you just wanted to see the customer name and the country, and that's all you wanted to see, you could just put that in there, and I'll just copy that. And instead of the asterisk, which means all, I'll just paste customer name, and then I'll put a comma, and then I'll put country, and I'll put country in there. And I'll highlight that, copy it, and I'll paste it here. And again, I'm just using Command-C and Command-V to copy and paste. On Windows, you'd use Control-C, Control-V. And it doesn't matter if you have a space in between the comma or not. If you leave it out, that's okay. In some cases, spaces will obviously be necessary. You wouldn't want to omit a space there because it wouldn't recognize the select statement. But as far as a comma, it recognizes the comma and it's separating those two column names. So what it should do here is run a query, and a query is just a request, really. And when we run it, it's going to show those two columns, and it's going to show all the customers, because we're not limiting it in any way. We're not running any filter or anything like that. So we'll just run it. And there it is. So it's showing all of them. It's still showing 91. So it's still showing all the records. It's only showing two columns. So that's one way we could show columns, but typically we'll put the asterisk in here. So that's just one thing I wanted to point out so far. Now, if you ever need to reset this, if you're like, I want to see what it looks like before, just click on this thing. Just go over here, and that'll kind of reset it and show you your entire table once again. So you can see there's all these countries here: Germany, Mexico, UK, Sweden. Let's see if US is in here. USA, I see a couple USAs. I don't know how many, but let's say you wanted to see all the USAs. You wanted to see all the customer names that were from the USA. That's where you can use something called a filter. Here's the where clause, which is actually a filter. So if you ever use Microsoft Access or something like that, they have filter tools and things like that, but we're using code to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to filter it, and we have to say what we want filtered. And we write that with our SQL code. So if we wanted to only see the countries for USA, and you have to specify USA, you can't just put United States, it has to be USA just as it is there, we use the where clause. And we put that at the end because we're saying select all from the table customers, because that's the table we're working with. And I'm going to put a space, and I'll put where, and I'll put it in caps because it's SQL code. And I'll say country, I'll specify the column name, and I have to put it exactly as it is. So don't put a small c, put a capital C, and don't put county and spell it wrong or anything like that. If you're not sure, just copy it. If you don't trust yourself, copy it and paste it here. And finish things off with a semicolon. It might work without it. We have where country, and we also have to put in the condition. What condition do we want? It's where country is what? And that would just be equal to USA. Now, I can't just put in USA like that because it won't work. If I do this, I'll get some kind of error, unknown USA. Because it's a value that's in there and it's a string, it's using letters, we should put quotes around here. And, well, I should say we must put quotes around here. So let's put quotes around here and run it again, and now it works. The only time we don't need quotes is if we're using something with numbers, like customer ID. I don't think we need to put quotes around that because it's not really a string. But this is probably specified as a string, country, meaning it's a word, it's letters, it's characters. So now it works, and it's showing us 13. So this is where we get our answer. So if we want to find out something, if they were like, hey, how many of our customers are from USA? See, that's what they talk like. You would say, oh, why 13? Because I just did a query, and I figured it out that there's 13 customers from the USA. And see, that's how you talk in business when you're working with these databases. You talk like that. But anyway, that's basically what we're doing there. So this is where you'll see your results up at the top. So let's look at some other things here. We already looked at if we just wanted to show two columns. And again, let's just say we wanted to see the customer ID, the customer name, and the city. And that's all we needed. We could go up here, and instead of select all, we could put customer ID if we needed that. For some reason, we could put that in there and just paste it, and then a comma. And then if we needed the customer name, you could just copy this from here and paste it, and I'm not going to put spaces in there. And then maybe you want to see the city, although I don't know why they don't have the state in here, but they don't. And make sure you don't put a comma after. Sometimes you can accidentally put a comma there. You're used to putting commas. It won't work if there's a comma after, so make sure you get rid of that. There's only commas in between. So what you're going to do here is just run it again, and this time you'll just get the three columns: customer ID, customer name, and the city. And currently, they're putting them in order by the customer ID because that's the first column that comes up. But you could change that. You could put it in any order that you want. We'll talk about doing that in a few minutes. But let's look at a different one. Let's look at products. This will be more exciting. We'll take a look at products. Now, we could already see there's 77 here. And if you ran this query, it's just clicking on products is the same thing as running this query because that's kind of the default query that comes up. So when you run it, it just says there's 77 records. And that's all you need to do here. And one thing I just want to point out, there's 77. And remember, you could scroll over here, and then you could scroll in here too. So you might have to scroll down, and then you could scroll in this like window here, and this goes all the way down. Now, there's not a lot that you want to see right now. But one thing that we can do here is we could take a look at price. You can look at all these prices here, like, oh, some things are like $97 and $21. Some are $6. And I'm not sure what these things are that I'm looking at. Some I recognize, some I don't. But as far as these products here, if you wanted to say, what are the cheapest things here? I see something here for $10. What if I want to see all the items that are $10 or less? Well, then you could use a filter. You could put in where and use the where clause, and I'll just put in where, and I'll say where price, because that's what we're talking about. We're looking at price right now. We're not looking at anything else. We're looking at price, and we're going to say where price, and you have to spell it exactly as it is. Now, I think I could spell price without having to copy it and paste it. I'll say less than or equals, and you want to put less than first. Don't put equals less than. Put less than or equals, just like in math. And make sure you put equals, not plus. So we're going to say less than or equals 10. And you could put 10.00, but you don't have to put quotes around it. So what will happen now is we'll see all the columns because we're using the asterisk. And when we run it, we should see only items where the price is less than 10. Now there's 77 to start. Let's see how many come up when we have less than $10. And there we go. We have 14. And it's kind of in a random order here. It's 10, 6, 9, 20. It looks like it's in product ID order. But if you wanted to see the cheapest thing here, you could go further. You could use something called order by. Now, order by, if you go over here, you'll see order by. Order by is really just sorting. If you ever used Microsoft Access again, and maybe you haven't, they have a sort feature, and that's all we're going to do is sort. And sort is just putting things in a certain order, just like you would in Excel. You could sort columns in Excel, and that's all we're doing here. We're just going to sort these, and instead of having this jumbled order here, we're going to sort them and use order by. Now I'm going to go after the 10 here and put order by, and I'll put price, because that's what we're using. Now you could use ASC for ascending, which means it'll ascend, go from the smallest to the largest, which is what we want. We want the cheapest. Or if you went descending, if you went DESC, that's descending. And if you know you typed it right, it's in blue. And then it would go from the highest price to the lowest. Now, we're still dealing with all the ones that are less than $10. But if you don't put anything there, if you don't put ascending, it'll default to ascending. So I'm going to leave it to a default because that's what we want. And I'll hit run. And there's my 14 products. And it's showing that Guy Toast, I guess that's some kind of German thing, is the cheapest. It's only $2.50 for 500 grams. I mean, that's a deal. This is the place to get your Guy Toast and your Kanbu and Philo Mix and Tortilla and Rhonbrau. Maybe that's a beer or something. Cloister beer or something. Might be. Anyway, let's say you just wanted to see 5 of these. You just wanted to see the 5 cheapest of this or the 5 least expensive of here. You can take this further because you're sorting by price, and you could also use something called limit. Now I'm putting in caps because it's SQL. I'll put limit 5. That way I'll only see 5. And again, all this stuff is over here. So if you weren't sure, you could go look for limit. You could look for like, you could and or, anything like that you want to join together. But we're just doing basic stuff here. It's not that exciting. It's just retrieving information from a database. That's all we're doing with this SQL code. It's not really that difficult. We can't really break anything unless we start deleting records, but we're just getting information. Just like if you went down to student services and wanted to find out your transcript and your grades and things like that, they would look through a database and find out where you are, how many credits you have, and where you are with your courses. That's all we're doing here is just running queries. Or if they wanted to find out how many people are going to be on the honor roll or whatever, they would run a query based on grade point average. Now here we're just going to limit by 5, so let me run this. And we have 5 as expected, and there's the 5. So we have Guy Toast through Tortilla, Philo Mix, Kanbu, Guarana, Fantastica are all the least expensive items from our products list of 77. Now next we'll take a look at our employees. Here's employees. Now there's only 9 here. Now, here's the employees, 1 through 9, and they have like a little description here. They have notes here. So this field or this column is a little more detailed. So we probably won't want to retrieve anything from here, but we have their ID number, we have their last name. And what we might want to do here, and maybe we don't need all that. Maybe we can just do something and just put employee ID. And again, I'll copy this. I'll copy employee ID and paste one. And I'll put a comma, and then I'll do this one, copy, paste, and first name. And remember, don't put a comma after. So let's just look at it again. We're still seeing all 9. It's just a little easier to look at now because we don't have all the descriptions, which were taking up a lot of space. So there's only 9 employees there, and right now they're by ID number. They're not by last name, I don't believe. They're not alphabetical, but if you wanted them alphabetical, you know how to do that. That's order by, that's sorting. You could just do order by, and that would be last name. So you can copy last name, or you could type it correctly And you could paste that there, and it would be ascending, so it would be starting from A to Z would be ascending, so you don't have to put ascending there. So I'll run it and see what it does, and it shows me Buchanan, Callahan, all the way through Soyama. So that's just one way to sort our employees. Now, we don't have a lot of employees here, but let's say we were like, we're not making a lot of money on our products here, especially those inexpensive ones. We need to get rid of some of our employees here. And we might want to actually get rid of the newest employees. So what you could do is you can order by employee ID. And I'll just type this in, make sure I use a capital I and a capital D. So I'm going to order by employee ID, and I'm going to use descending. Now, why would I use that? Because the newest employee, the highest number, is going to be first. And you might say, well, we need to axe at least 3 of those 6 because we're not making enough money on our stuff in our products. So we have to axe 3 of our employees. Now, this wouldn't be a good way to do it, just to axe the newest people. But if they had to do that, they could go up here and say limit 3. So now we're going to select these employees, and we're going to order by employee ID, except we're going to go in reverse order. So we're going to find the newest ones and then get the top 3. And that means these people, Dodsworth, Callahan, and King, they're gone. They're the newest employees, they're gone. Now, you could also sort other ways. Now, I'm just going to click on employees again. You can also go through here and sort by their birth date. Maybe you want to get rid of the oldest people and find out their date here and sort it that way. You could go in here and say order by, let's say you just wanted to find the oldest to the youngest, order by birth date, and you would do ascending because you'd want the earliest year first. So you could just do order by birth date. So this isn't by age. So if it was by age, you'd go differently. But if you did this, let's just see if this works. And there we have 52, 55. So we have the oldest people first. So if you wanted to get rid of the older people, you could go through this way and actually sort them by their birth date. And those are the older people. Or if you wanted to get rid of the youngest people, if you're like, they're young, they'll find a job easy. You could do it the other way. You could do it descending. And because it's birth date, it's going to put the youngest people first. So you could say, okay, let's get rid of, Anne, Nancy, and Janet. Anne's was one of the newest person anyway, and she's also the youngest, so she'd be the first to go anyway. Although she is fluent in French and German, which is very good for this company, to be working with this company. I don't see anybody else with that kind of, this guy's Japanese, could read French. This guy, they're not getting rid of him either. So anyway, there's different ways that you can always sort this and order this kind of stuff. Now, let's take a look at orders. We've been looking at people here. We'll take a look at orders. And what you could do, there's 830 here. Maybe you could find out what employee is taking care of these orders, because there's all these orders here, and there's actually ways you could find out. Now, you don't want to get rid of somebody who's involved in a lot of these orders, who's working with all these customers here. So, that's another thing that we can do. How would you do that? How would you find what employees are working with what orders? Well, you do know that you have employee IDs, and you could kind of match them up by their orders. You could even count how many are there. One thing you could do, let's just to start, you could look at our orders here, and you could say, well, let's order them by employee ID. Okay, what would that do? Well, it'll sort them, and it'll at least jumble them together. It'll start with the lowest number and work its way up. And you could do that. That's just one way to do it. And you could go through here. Now, this would be horrible to do, but you could go through here and say, there's how many of these. And then you could go, there's how many of them. At least it's kind of grouping it together. And I'm mentioning that because eventually there's a group feature that we could use in here, and there's also a count where we could count these up. Now, one way to count these up is the way we already know how to do this is you could say, instead of even ordering, you could just say orders and say where employee ID equals 1. Remember, and you don't need quotes here. So that means select all the orders where the employee ID equals 1. And you could go, 123. So, employee 1 has 123 orders. Let's check out employee 2 of 96. And you could write these down. Now, obviously, that's not a big deal if you have 9 employees to do that. It would take you 5 minutes to go through, just run 9 queries and do that and find out how many there are. And let's see, this one is 127. So they take the lead. 3 takes the lead. Okay, so you could do that. That's one way to do it. There's also something called count. they actually have a count feature in here. It's like a function that you could run in here that'll actually count the number of rows that's in there. Here they have select count. It's a little bit different. It doesn't have select all. It's select count, and then you select the column name. Let's just try that and see how it works. So it goes select count from the table, and then you have to give the condition, whatever condition that you want. So let's go select count. Let's start this over and do select count. And what we want to count is employee ID, because that's what we're counting. And it's from the orders table. That's the one we were working on, the orders. If you forgot that, we're working on upper and lowercase orders. So we're selecting the count from there, from orders. And I don't think we have to do any condition. We don't necessarily have a condition here that we're doing. Let's just try this first and see what shows up. It's saying select count from orders. Now, what we could do, actually, now if we wanted a condition, what we could do is put where employee ID equals 1. Now, if we did that and we ran it, we get the same thing we had before. We just get a return here. So that, I don't know if that's really helpful because we'd still have to do this every time. But what they have is they have something called group by, where you can actually group them together. They have this, if you go down further, it gets group by. Now this gets a little more complex. I don't expect you to remember this, but I'm just showing that we could do this here if we wanted to figure out how many of these are. So we could do a group by, and we could group by that particular column. And let's just see how this works. I'm going to do select, and let's put employee ID in here too. We're going to select the count, but we can also just put the employee ID as one of our columns to show, because we won't know how they match up. Here's the count, and we want to actually see the employee ID next to that. So we're going to show the employee ID, comma, and then the count from orders. And what we could do is we could do group by, and we'll group by employee ID. Again, I have a spelling error there, so if I did this, it wouldn't work. I'd probably get some kind of error, although it doesn't seem to mind that. Let me try it again. So I'm grouping by employee ID. And this way, I have a very quick way to look at it. I don't have to do it 9 separate times. I could do it one time. By just throwing in group by, it's grouping in these counts that we're doing. So we're grouping them together. What grouping does is it kind of, if there's duplicates, it just kind of stacks them on top, and it just puts the top one on top, but we're also putting a count. So we're grouping them here, and it's only just showing these, but then it's kind of stacking the totals on top. So it's giving me my count back here. And that way I have a very quick way to figure out. And I can say, oh, well, let's see who's the best. So I can even say order by if I wanted to. If I want to say, well, who's doing the best sales here, whatever they're doing, I could say order by, and it would be order by count, because that's what we're doing here. And I could just paste that there. I could still order by count, see if that works okay. That's the column that I'm ordering by, I think. Let me just see if and it's going in ascending order, so let's change it. It's starting with 42. So let's put a space and then descending, and let's run it again. Now we see, oh, 156. So these are our top employees. So if we were going to get rid of people based on how many sales they have, if this is sales, I don't know if this is sales, we'd get rid of 6, 7, and 9. And actually, we were talking about the newest people anyway, and that makes sense because they haven't been there the longest. So the people who have been there the longest have the most, although number 4 has really been getting a lot there, 156. So these are the top people, and 7, 6, and 9 employee IDs, they have kind of the lowest amount of sales here. So this was a way to do that. So we used a count function in here to actually count the number of records we have of the employee IDs for each time that we do that, for each record that we do that. So we're counting the records of employee ID as we do that. So that's kind of a nice tool. I don't expect you to memorize all this. I just want you to know that these are some of the tools we could use with databases. There's all kinds of things to do here. So these are just tools at your disposal. It's not that complicated. You just have to know what you want and just kind of know that you have the tools there to be able to do it. And what I'm going to do next is, in part 2 of this, is I'm going to give you some options to figure out some things. Because so far I'm just kind of giving a show and tell here of what we can do with SQL queries. But what I'll do for the second part is have you do some things so you can go through here and figure those out. I'll do that for part 2 of the video because you've probably seen enough of this and you're probably excited to be playing around with this database and get started. So in part 2, I'll give you some requirements that you'll basically just get numbers from me, and you could put those numbers and you could put the results into your comments for this exercise. That's kind of what we did in past years using PHPMyAdmin, but we're going to use this, and you're just going to give me your answers that you come up with, and I'll make them very easy, so it won't be that hard.